Kia ora, Morella. Welcome to the NZAPH conversation, I guess. We're interviewing all of our professional members of the NZAPH, and we're just really curious about what you're up to, and as a hypnotherapist, what sort of clients you might see, or anything else that you think might be useful for people to know about what you do.
Fantastic. Thank you for the opportunity, Meredith. So, as you would know, I have a background in medicine. I used to practice medicine. And I realized very early on that medicine abates symptoms rather than addressing the root causes in most cases. Few exceptions to that. I mean, you wouldn't even think again about going to an emergency room or fighting an infection with antibiotics. That's obvious. But for chronic illness in particular, medicine doesn't really work that well. So I have a particular interest in physical disease and not only using hypnotherapy to abate the symptoms, just symptomatically, but also looking at the background of what is the emotional and psychological conflict or trauma that the person is carrying that is either inducing or maintaining or not allowing this person to heal from this particular physical illness. So yeah, I have a very strong interest in physical illness. Probably the obvious one would be pain. Pain is like, that's how it manifests for most people. And then you start digging into what was happening in their lives when it all started, and you start discovering all these layers of hardship. That's the way to describe it.
Some people might wonder how on earth hypnotherapy could actually help to reduce pain. And when we're thinking about conventional talk therapy and we think about the emotional pain, often there is sometimes that manifestation of the emotional pain going into a physical manifestation of pain as well. And how, as a hypnotherapist, you work with that. So would you like to just sort of share a little bit of insight into how you might work with a client who's presenting with physical pain?
Yeah. Okay. So the initial approach would be, let's solve as much of the symptom as quickly as possible. So you can really address it symptomatically. And so you can use techniques such as, imagining that you've got a healing balm that you're applying to the area, and that area is becoming more and more anesthetized. I mean, I've used it even with kids who are about to get an injection. You apply this little magical balm that is going to make them not feel pain. So you can use it that way very effectively. But as you said, emotional pain often translates into physical pain. So what I have found is that most people who have chronic pain do have an emotional, let's call it, situation. And there's no guilt in saying this, by the way, because people think, they're all going to think that I am weird or I've got problems, or we all have lives. And so we all have to address circumstances. And some of these circumstances are very painful. And so life is, by definition, how do we deal with the daily struggle? And sometimes we deal with the daily struggle in an adaptive form, and sometimes we don't. And when we don't, very often, and I tell my clients this, as it is in the mind, it is in the body. So if your mind is struggling, it's traumatized, it's in pain, there's something you can't let go of, that's going to translate into your body. And so that's a second layer. It's not the superficial of the anesthetic balm. It would be, okay, let's go. Are you ready for this? Let's go and look at what really in the background is hurting you in your soul and is being translated into physical pain. And so once you address that, the trick would be, how do we change the story? It could well be that it was something that happened in childhood when you were helpless. So we have to go back into that child's mind, because we all have this part of our subconscious mind that's still a little child and is still hurting from what happened when you were 5 years old, and you made a decision at 5 years old that was unconscious, but it's still sitting there. So we have to convince that little child that you're actually not that helpless child anymore. You are this grown-up person. You have managed to do all these things and that, and it's going to be okay. And so you go back and reframe the story, or change it in a way so that it doesn't hurt either anymore, or at least you reduce the pain as much as you can.
A lot of skeptics might go, well, how on earth can you just change your story? How does it even begin to work? And we're working on a subconscious level often to change that story on that deeper level, rather than just thinking about it and talking about it in a session. there is a process that a hypnotherapist will journey a client through. What would you like to explain to maybe the skeptic that thinks, oh, how on earth can you just change a story? If I wanted to do that, I could have done that, but I don't, because it doesn't work like that. That they really have no idea.
Yeah. I'd say the skeptic hasn't had the experience. I have found that some people just conversationally, they're telling you the story, and then you point to a detail or a point of view that they have never thought about.
Mm.
And just in conversation, that can be enough to completely shift the way they look at something. And sometimes that's not enough. So I think that's one necessary step, is that the client will agree with your reframe, where they think, oh, okay, I haven't really thought about it that way before. But then the second step is, well, you use hypnosis, which, by the way, I tell my clients as well, is not a weird thing. Whenever you're sitting in front of the TV, you're watching a movie and it gets emotional and you cry, you've been hypnotized with a movie. It's just a special state of suggestibility. So if the client and I agree, hey, this is a good way to look at this story that has been hurting you, and then we reinforce it with hypnosis, as in, the art of suggestion. And then especially if that person is willing to then do it again, sometimes I very often give my clients audios that they can repeat at home as many times as they feel that it's requested. Then that reinforces then that shift. And every time that you address, did you know that every time that you access a memory and you think about it, you change it?
Mm.
So, if you keep going back to that particular memory and then you change the thinking around it, eventually it will change. And in this case, we want positive change, and that's definitely possible.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that they're distorting, deleting, and generalizing all the information that they're holding as a memory.
Yeah.
And that the memory isn't necessarily correct. It may have been distorted in between the event and your understanding of that event, depending on how old you were or how much you could understand that.
Marginalized as well, because often we remember one detail of that event and not everything else. So typical case scenario, I had I had troubles with my mother. My mother was this and that. She never loved me enough. And then you start realizing, oh, but you had a grandmother and you were her favorite. Oh, you had a godmother as well, and an auntie. And they were always, so yes, it could well be that relationship with the mother was not good, but this person had another 5 people. And so once you shift the attention to all these other people who were there, and you start feeling the gratitude for having that support, then that changes the story.
Absolutely. A story changes lives and it changes worlds that we live in. When we're kind of looking at the reality, the construct, that's the hypnotic cue to engage the imagination in an empowering way, right? So when we're thinking about even the power of the client's own reframe, this is where often when we're working on that subconscious level, just to invite a new question arrives a new idea in the client's mind. And that can be it. That can be a game changer. Mm.
Yeah. And again, it's that idea, often it's very old trauma. It's childhood trauma, at the root of the problem. And that inner child hasn't grown up. It's still 5 years old, still 6 years old. And of course, we don't have time or even the idea in our daily lives that we should go and have a chat to that little 5-year-old. And tell them that it's all okay, that we've managed to survive, that, we have achieved this and that. So that's another aspect that is very powerful, I find.
Yeah.
Going into those parts of us that are still children, immature and helpless. Yeah.
Because quite often when an adult reacts to a particular scenario or situation, they can almost act as if they were 6 or as if they were 16 or whatever that was at that moment of that trauma. And the other people around them go, what? I wanted to ask you about what got you into hypnosis to begin with and how long ago that was, and sort of whether you had an experience of hypnosis yourself or, what was that journey to becoming a hypnotherapist?
Yeah. So I had a personal episode. This is year 1999. So we're talking about 24 years ago. where I woke up one morning, I had this massive, massive allergic rash. Went to the hospital. I was living in Paris at the time. I had just stopped practicing medicine. I was looking back, I realized that I was just not surviving the medical lifestyle. You know, the life of a junior doctor is not conducive to health. And therefore, I had a breakdown and I quit. And I said, I can't work in a hospital ever again. And anyway, I moved to Paris and I'm studying filmmaking there, of course, as you do when you have a midlife crisis. And then I wake up this rash. And I went to the hospital. I got steroids. I got my antihistamines. The rash didn't go away. I couldn't sleep for 3 days. It was itchy all over. And then on day 4, I'm desperate. And I had read along that time, somehow, somebody had lent me Louise Hay's book, You Can Change Your Life. And so I started thinking, is this a mind thing? Is there an emotional message behind it? It was winter and the rash had appeared on my face and my hands. And so I started thinking, well, surely these are the only places in me that can be seen by others because I'm covered with winter gear. And I did notice that since I had that massive rash, people were particularly nice to me in the metro, and everyone was like asking me, "Are you okay?" Like the lady in the bakery, the people in the building. And I realized, oh my God, could it be that I'm trying to get attention from people? I feel really lonely. I don't have friends yet. I've been here for 9 months. And that was like a whoa, aha moment. And then the rash disappeared within like 36 hours. And I'm sure
Wow.
it was in the steroids and the antihistamines because they had done nothing for 4 days. So after that happened, I started reading everything I could about mind body medicine. I became obsessed with mind body medicine. And then one thing led to another. I trained in a number of techniques like body talk, Psyche. I met Bruce Lipton. I went down that track. And then I set up a clinic 20 years ago now, Motherwell Holistic Health, still running. And I'm part of it. We're a team of about 18 people. And in the team, we had at some point a hypnotherapist, and I did some work with her. And I realized that that was another very powerful tool. And also one that people can understand, can relate to. It's, because one thing is energy medicine, but then for some people that would be very woo-woo. I think hypnotherapy falls into that middle ground where it was used extensively by the medical profession up to the pharmaceutical drugs took over in the 60s. And up to that point, every doctor trained in hypnotherapy because it was so powerful. Most anesthesiologists would train in hypnotherapy, and they would often use that as part of their approaches. So it's a modality that has been in the professional medical world, and now it's not used because, of course, it requires time. It requires for doctors to have that relationship with the patient, which nowadays you can't have in the practice of conventional medicine. It's 10-minute consult. Here's your drug. Off you go. So so that's me. I trained, how many years now? I think I'm coming up to 11, maybe 12.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you're based where? So if people wanted to find you, whereabouts are you in New Zealand?
So my clinic is Motherwell Holistic Health, where we are a multidisciplinary team. We have got all sorts of modalities in there if people are interested in having a look at the website. And that's on Mountain Road in Auckland. 120 Mountain Road in Auckland, so quite central. When I also can see people online if necessary, and I do have a number of, especially the international clients I see online. Yeah.
Nice. Some people might ask, does hypnotherapy work as well online as in person, because a lot of people wonder. So how would you talk to that?
I think it works, and especially because I'm also recording what we're doing. And then I send the client their audio, and then they can do it at home. So there is that element where it works. Of course, there's an element of that personal touch when you have a person in the same room. That's something that you don't have when you're online. And so I personally prefer it, but probably because you create a closer connection when you've got a person in the room. But with regards to the effectiveness of the therapy, I think they are comparable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Online
Nice.
and in person.
You're obviously a member of the NZAPH, the New Zealand Association of Professional Hypnotherapists. Why is that important to you?
Well, I think it's important to have a collegial relationship with other people who do this, similar work as to what you do. I think it's quite a serious association. I've been to very wonderful conferences where the quality of the presentations has been outstanding. And it just, it creates that body of support where, well, you can't practice alone. You shouldn't practice alone. And a level of safety as well. The fact that you have other people that you can talk to and maybe ask for advice with a particular case, or where you can find where the next training is, or who's coming into New Zealand that hasn't been here before, and so on. So yeah, it is very important to be part of it.
Do you have a particular client that stands out that maybe you could share their story that might, maybe if someone's listening to this, they might relate to that, and perhaps that could be a bit of an inspiration for them to take action and getting help themselves?
I don't know why this is the first one that comes to mind. There's hundreds of them, but for some reason, this is one that comes to mind. I had a lady come once with a 6-year-old, and the 6-year-old little girl had a breathing problem. She would go, and so she had taken the 6-year-old to, I don't know how many specialists in Auckland, probably 3 or 4, and they couldn't figure out what was going on with her breathing. Now, interestingly, so I do see kids, and I'm talking to the little girl and asking her about her life, and she's telling me all about her grandmother, her cat, and she's got chickens that she feeds every day, and she's got these 5 friends at school, and but the girl's like really chirpy and really happy, And then I turn around and I see the mother, and she's got her head between her hands and she's looking down. And I'm like, the problem is not the girl. The girl is picking up on her mother's energy. And so I turn around and I say, what do you do? And she was like I think she was an accountant or a lawyer, somebody with a big career, and she had 3 children. So she was really, really struggling to do, the full-time work as well as being the parent to these 3 children. Anyway, I said, I don't think your child has got a problem. I think you and I have to talk. And so I asked her to come back again. And so she came back, and I said, I think it's you. It's you. Your girl's really happy. She's well adapted. She's got friends. She's got a, loving relationship. She's got animals that she relates to. I think she's picking up on you. Tell me about your life. And anyway, it did turn out that she was really, really struggling. Well, the funny part of the story is that years later, probably a couple of years later, I got an email saying, hi, Morella, thank you so much for our session. My daughter never had another episode again. I quit my job 3 weeks after I saw you, and I became a hypnotherapist.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really funny. That's
Very
the one that
nice.
comes to mind straight away.
That's brilliant. Sometimes we never do know where a session is going to head until we begin into it. And I think a lot of times people kind of think, oh, hypnotherapists use scripts, and they have this like one way of doing things and so on. And they have this idea that Hollywood has maybe conjured up at some point, that mesmerism and sort of that kind of look into my eyes business. You are under my control or my command, that kind of thing. And I think it's, nice to share sometimes the organic nature of how we work with clients, because it isn't script bound at all. It's sometimes quite intuitive. Yeah, it's quite in tune with the client in that moment in time, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have some pattern in the back of your mind of where you're going, but there isn't a script. I don't think there is a script. You have to adapt exactly what you're saying to what's going on for this person, And for example, if you're doing a calming sort of let's call it a script. I use the imagery that belongs to that client. I always ask them, what's your happy place? Oh, it's this beach where I used to go when I was a kid. Okay, what does it look like? Oh, the Puhutukawas are here and there's the sea. Okay, so let's go there. And so the image is always different. I don't standardize that happy place because it's different for everybody. So yeah, no, I think that's a cliche. And often the clients come with a cliche, no, am I going to stand this, I'm going to do noises like a chicken? I'm like, you know what? People who go on stage and play the chicken game is because they wanted to do it in the first place. That's why they put their hands up when they went and volunteered to be on stage. If you don't want to do the chicken, then you won't do it. Yeah?
You mentioned before that you record it and you give them their recording. And I think sometimes in the age of YouTube and all of these other calm apps and this, it's very generic and it's not always client-centric in the way of really dealing with what the client actually needs.
Yes.
It's more global. I think coming to a hypnotherapist like yourself is an opportunity for someone to really get that personal touch and get to the root cause of what it is that's going on for them. And nothing's going to really replace that. You know, just listening to someone's app is not going to be it. What do you think about, I guess, that this era that we're in, where people are kind of looking for self-help and they're dialing up and wondering potentially why it's not working sometimes too?
I think there's a place for that. There's a place for that. It's a simple way to start. And I think it's also good because people would have already had the experience of having used an app, for example, and having done some guided meditation to a point where it's not weird anymore. But in saying that, I have, for example, a client that I love dearly. I've seen her for a few years now. She's got Parkinson's, severe Parkinson's. We've done all sorts of work. She couldn't sleep. She had anxiety. She had the grief of losing her abilities. We've done a lot of work. And anyway, recently she had the operation where they do the deep brain stimulation, and that operation is done without anesthesia. So they're just looking for the place in the brain where we're going to put the electrodes. And she said, I just went in with my audio because as soon as I listened to your voice, it was like, yeah, And so she went with that personal connection. She said, it was as if you were in the room. And so I knew I could relax and I would be okay. Yeah, and there's something precious about that, the fact that you have that intimate connection with your practitioner and that you can take your practitioner with you is something you don't get from an app. And also the app wouldn't cater for somebody with such a complex problem, as in the Parkinson's and the degree to which she has it and the symptoms that she presents with. That's not something that you can do generically. And the same thing, I have clients with ulcerative colitis, with Crohn's, with autoimmune diseases, and their symptoms are particular. They're not generic. Mm. So maybe I think there's a place, generic, to begin with, to have a taste. And then there's definitely a place for the practitioner. And there's something that, at the end of the day, what really heals is human relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not generic.
And that little girl and her mother, that was a perfect example of how that dynamic works. And many times I was just watching something about since COVID and how that's affected many children going to school and getting they're getting anxiety. They're not able to turn up to school anymore. And there's an epidemic. And the relationships that they're having with their parents, I can't imagine it being very easy for the parents. And I can't imagine that calming the anxiety as much as maybe even aggravating it even more, because there's layers of disappointment and frustration and stuckness, and it sort of amps up. So, I'm not sure if you've worked with many children or young people who are finding it difficult to go to school because of anxiety. Do you get many of those coming in?
There is a lot of anxiety, and I'd say actually it's funny because it starts with tummy aches. I don't know if you've had that experience, but any child between 9 and 11 who's got tummy aches, that's anxiety. So you get all these preteens getting tummy aches, and the parents think it's a tummy ache. They take them to the doctors. They don't know what it is, and that's your first symptom, really. Then they realize that it's actually anxiety. You know, they probably don't have the language, or they don't know what. Yeah, that symptom is actually anxiety. So then I get a lot of the teenagers as well. Yeah, there is a lot of anxiety around. I don't think that they're getting the solutions out there that they need. Our
Mm,
mental health system is broken. I'm trying to
mm,
find a softer word, but actually it's very, very difficult for anybody to go and find a mental health professional. And so they're not getting the help that they need. And often, you know, just having the basics of guided imagery of hypnosis to attack it when it starts is just enough to manage it. And
so
of
what
course, like you're saying, it's relationships and the family and the parents and the school and all of this is added to that.
Yeah. What advice would you give to parents that might be suffering in that regard with dealing with a teenager who just wants to lock themselves in the room and not come out?
I find that parents often blame it on, say, things like social media, or they're addicted to their gaming, or so they blame something that is quite superficial. They're using those things like gaming or the social media to escape the suffering that they've got going inside. They're not being lazy. They're not useless. They're not any of these words that are given to the teenager. They're going through some suffering, and they're using the gaming and the social media as a mechanism to cope. So it's really about, okay, what I'm doing as a parent is not working. What can I do to access this child, to make them understand that I'm with them, that I want to listen. And if I listen and I hear something that I don't like, I'm not going to react. I'm going to listen and try to understand the world as you see it, because it's definitely not the way I see it. Otherwise, I would have changed my behavior 10 years ago. So it's really about, a lot of parents think that we need to change the child's behavior, but actually the starting point is, how do I, as a parent, change my approach to this kid so that I can understand what they're going through, right?
Mm,
And so that's a
yeah.
very, very good starting point, that the child realizes, actually, I have somebody with me at home. They're not against me, they're with me.
Mm.
And we're going to figure this out together.
Let's imagine a parent rings you or contacts you for help with their child. What are the expectations? Let's say they're 15, the child's brought in, or the adolescent is brought in to see you. Are you wanting the parent to be in that space at the same time, or are you seeing that 15-year-old by themselves, or is it a bit of a combination?
I always ask, what do you want to do? I ask the teenager, what do you want to do? Do you want your mom in the room, or do you want to be alone? And often, you know, about half of them would say, I want my mom in the room. I don't know if I get the, you know, there is a bias there, because people who come to see a hypnotherapist might have a very good relationship with their mothers. Often when the parent insists in that they want to be there, you realize that there's a problem with the parent. Yeah, there is a control, or there's something going on there. So it's up to the teenager to choose, really.
Because quite often there is that secondary gain that might be going on, which perhaps other people who haven't heard about secondary gain might not understand what that is. Do you have an example maybe of how secondary gain works sometimes in these situations, where a child might be presenting with an issue and they're getting rewarded somehow for it, and in some way that has to be resolved so they don't have that pattern anymore? So how might you work with someone like that?
That's not only with listen, the subconscious is our friend. The subconscious will find a way to solve the problem dysfunctionally if we don't find a functional way to solve the problem, right? It's our friend. That's how it is, really. So I have had, for example, the one that comes to mind right now was a boy. He was in a boys' school, very, very private school, so very and with a ethos that was all about how good we are and how excellent and so on. He was part of the rowing team. And the team became very aggressive, almost bullying. So you had to, they had to win. If you're not training hard enough, you're a sissy. And the atmosphere wasn't good, but they had been champions like for 3 years in a row. It was not only the teammates, but also the coach, and the whole atmosphere was really, really pushy. And this boy, actually, I discovered that later. Anyway, this boy presents with a severe pain in his back to the point where he can't even go to school. And he's been to multiple specialists. They're saying, oh yeah, you might have a herniated disc, maybe not, blah, blah, blah. But what is he getting out of this? He wasn't going to school. He had to quit the rowing team. Everything that he couldn't do up front. And honestly, because that would mean that at 15, he was going to have to bear the bullying and their ridicule, his body did it for him. So, and I mean, that's just one of so many examples. I've had like mothers of 6 who have got incurable chronic fatigue. When you start digging, they're exhausted. Nobody's helping in the house. She has got no voice. She's like the doormat. And of course, the body then creates a chronic fatigue syndrome. So the subconscious is a marvelous thing. It's always trying to solve our problems.
Absolutely.
And that is one of the things that we always look at. What is your symptom allowing you to do or not to do that you wouldn't otherwise be able to manifest or present?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, are there any sort of final thoughts that you'd like to share with people out there, or just a philosophy that you like to go by, that you'd like to share?
I always start with this premise that as it is in the mind, it is in the body. I personally, so myself and my family, because of my background in medicine, I became what I call a medical minimalist. Meaning, if you can avoid taking medication, do so, right? Why? Because medication is dangerous. Every single medication has got side effects. Same with surgery. You really have to think about having surgery or not. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but it's inherent to the mechanism of actions of drugs that you're always going to have adverse effects. And so you end up with an adverse effect. And so you take a second medication to get rid of that adverse effect. And you can end up having a whole soup of pharmaceuticals, and each dealing with a side effect of the first one that you started with. So in my personal life and that of my family, every symptom that I begin with, I will have a very good thinking about, what is this telling me? And then I will try to address the life situation that is leading me to manifest this particular symptom. So that's my starting point. And as a result, I have, I don't know, I think I've just turned 55, and I think comparing to most people, I have a very good health. My husband's the same. Health is not, I would say health is not difficult and it's not expensive. What do you need? You need good food. You need to move your body every day. You need to have a passion for life. You need to have good relationships. And that's about it, really. Illness is very expensive.
Yes.
So it's an ongoing daily thing. How do I get those needs met of good food, moving my body, having good relationships, having a purpose in life? And start there.
Nicely put. Well, it's been delightful, Morella, having you here to have a chat. If you need to find Morella, she can be contacted via the NZAPH website, Find a Hypnotherapist. And well, thank you again for your time, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Meredith.